So good evening, everyone. I'm Ed Tick, member of the board, and I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Elizabeth Nelson. Elizabeth has been a writer and editor for 4 decades. She's been a core faculty member and dissertation director at Pacifica Graduate Institute on that faculty for 18 years. She's co-author of The Art of Inquiry, author of Psyche's Knife, which I highly recommend, and the editor of the Journal of Jungian Scholarly Studies. And she's also, I believe, just written a play and is working on 2 more books. She's not a busy woman. On the more personal level, Elizabeth really loves working as a consultant for aspiring writers. If any of you out there are authors in process, I highly recommend Elizabeth as a magnificent mentor. But she affirms that this is the most important part of her biography. She shares her home with her 2 marvelous cats, Chester and Finnegan. And I want to give my personal testimony about Elizabeth. Elizabeth not only studies and teaches women warriorhood, she nurtures and guides the young. She understands and protects the woman warrior archetype. She crusades for its deeper understanding and nurturing in our culture and in our military. And she contributes to our wisdom about the distorted or the proper relationships between the masculine and the feminine, between power and love. Elizabeth truly embodies the feminine warrior archetype in powerful and positive ways. And I'm honored to introduce Elizabeth Nelson to you. It's all yours, my friend.
Thank you so much, Ed. What a wonderful introduction. I'm honored to be here, and I thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. It's really wonderful. Before I begin, I want you to notice the background of my screen. I have a few stories to tell, which is to explain a little bit of my fascination with women warriors and the subject of women and power more generally. Behind me are my broadsword, my rapier, and my dagger, and also a quarterstaff of a kind that I got in the Sierra Nevada. I did training in theatrical combat for a number of years and was able to perform with quarterstaff at one point. That was only my second evidence of fascination with armed women and with women who are who want to own their own power and who want to understand that they too have a martial nature, that the martial nature is not just limited to men. That's a misunderstanding that we have. I may tell the other 2 stories as we go along, but the book that Ed mentioned, Psyche's Knife, was actually the 3rd moment, if you will, in which I discovered my fascination with armed women. And it was the story of Eros and Psyche and the piece that everybody misses. A beloved story, a story that many Jungians have explored, analyzed. I mean, major Jungian thinking has gone into the story of Eros and Psyche or Amor and Psyche. And virtually every single one of these people missed the fact that Psyche uses a razor sharp dagger at a very key moment in the story, and it changes her fate and it changes the fate of her lover, Eros. So I began thinking, what is up with this, that we just simply won't look at a woman with a sharp knife? What is happening in Jungian analysis, in Jungian scholarship, where we won't look at this, or we dismiss it in some kind of very neglectful and reductive way? And then I began realizing in the course of my research that there's a long history of armed women that we have forgotten. So part of what I'm going to talk about tonight is that forgotten history. But let me back up just a moment and begin with a little bit of explanation of the title of the presentation, which is 3 views. What I want to look at today when I'm talking about women in power are 3 different perspectives towards it. One of them is the cultural archetypal perspective. And the way that I phrase that is through asking the question, what images of female power are moving through culture right now, or have been, say, just in the 21st century? Let's just take 20 years. The mythical perspective, that's the second view. What do we learn about martial power, about female martial power, from considering the mythic figures? And the three mythic figures I'm going to look at tonight, I'm going to stay within the Greek tradition. Actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about a few others, very, very briefly, but primarily my focus is going to be on the three martial figures within the Greco-Roman tradition, and that would be Athena, Ares, and Mars. I'm going to talk about those three in a little bit more depth. So that's the mythical perspective. We're all Jungians. We understand that for Jung, to understand the soul, we needed to go deep and we needed to go back into our history. We needed to relink our contemporary understanding of culture and individual life with the deep roots that nourish us, that feed that. So that's why I go to the mythical perspective. And I'm fascinated with what we discover when we really look closely at the images, and particularly the iconography. Not so much the written narratives, because they can be not quite as, let me put it this way, not quite as open-minded as I would like them to be, but the images themselves are very powerful. The third view is the astrological perspective. I don't know how many of you know the language of astrology, but in the hands of a very talented psychological astrologer, these archetypal figures really come to life. And not only that, but a very talented archetypal astrologer, a psychological astrologer, will bring these insights, the insight about the polytheistic psyche, which is an idea that Hillman developed in his work. The idea about the polytheistic psyche, they'll really bring it down to earth for you. So to give you just, a little bit of a taste of that particular aspect of this, every one of us, if we look at the language of astrology, every single one of us has Mars in our natal chart. So Mars is on our stage, in our inner theater. It's one of the figures that is basically helps show us who we are and motivates us in important ways. So women and men have an archetypal Mars on our inner stage. So I'll be speaking the language of psychological astrology as well. So those are the three views: the cultural perspective, archetypal cultural perspective, the mythical perspective, and the astrological perspective. And the fundamental point that I would like to get across tonight is something that may be very obvious to all of you. It may not even need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. Martial capacities are necessary and equally available to men and women. Employing them with greater intelligence can lead to the subtle and effective use of personal power in every arena of our lives. So getting to know our martial nature is important for women as well as men, becoming intelligent about it, thoughtful about it, rather than acting it out. Big difference between those two things. So one of the things that I discovered as I was working with the story of Eros and Psyche, or Amor and Psyche, which most of you probably know is about, the written text is about 2,000 years old. It comes from a 2nd century Roman novel by Apuleius, but the oral tradition goes back at least 500 years earlier. So in that story, as I mentioned, I was frankly shocked to discover that there are many tellings of that tale in which the fact that Psyche uses a knife at the bedside of her lover Eros is just dropped out of the narrative. And what I found is by really looking at this image of Psyche and her knife, that it was a wonderful image to express aspects of the feeling function in Jungian theory. In other words, the knife in that story, first of all, it's the soul's knife. It's Psyche's knife. And so for me, it was a very specific kind of blade. And because it's the soul's knife, the qualities that it included are warmth and depth and mystery and feeling, attachment. But as a knife, it also, and we see this in the alchemical writings, of course, with the stage called separatio, we see that the knife symbolizes the human capacity to differentiate, to focus, to prioritize, to choose. So if we blend these two ideas together, what we see is that can we choose, or Psyche's knife can suggest that we can choose in a feeling way, that we can prioritize with the heart as well as with the mind or the intellect. So this knife is very important in Psyche's story. And then eventually what happened with my fascination with this is that it became the research that was my doctoral dissertation. And then as Ed kindly pointed out, it became a book that I published about 10 years after finishing my dissertation. So that was one of the manifestations of my interest in women and power. But I think my fascination with women and power goes back to a much earlier time when, as a young girl and as a young woman, I was told that there were certain things I could not do because I was female. Being a sort of rebellious, not terribly obedient person, I didn't like this idea, didn't like hearing about it. And I resisted it with everything in my power. And I'm still fighting the good fight. I still believe that that the intelligent understanding of our power, and particularly of our martial power, is a very important part of our individuation process as women and as men. One of the books that is, one of the books by Hillman that is not well known, but I think extremely important, is a 1995 text called Kinds of Power. And in it, he basically creates a taxonomy of power, but he begins by challenging this idea of what, or by asking the question, what do we mean by power when we use that word power? It's a word that some of us recoil at, partly because when we hear the word power, what we hear in our language is domination. We hear power over. So what Hillman does in that book, and some of you may know that, is he says, let's go below this understanding of power. Let's look at this word more carefully. When we use the word power, what kinds of power might we mean? So I've invited you to bring along something to write with, a pen and paper, or what have you. So I would like to take 5 minutes for you to work individually with a piece of blank paper. I'd like you to put the word power in a circle in the center of the page. And then very quickly, this is a brainstorm, very quickly mind map it. In other words, draw spokes out from that center and think of every synonym for the word power that you can to get us started. Influence is a kind of power. Persistence is a kind of power. Patience, in my book, is a kind of power. So is restraint. So let's take 5 minutes. Go for it. Have fun. All right. Let's see if anybody would like to share any element of your mind map. Erica, do you want to coordinate calling on people?
Sure. So just go to chat and raise the hand, and I'll call on whoever comes first. So let's see. TJ, would you like to unmute? TG. Oh, that's Sivia. Sivia.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't realize I had hidden myself with my initials. Yeah, so it's Sivia, thank you. Just for the fun of it, I don't know that I have anything more profound or anything than anybody else, but I got a few little categories like the power of no, resistance, rebellion, willfulness, the power of yes, love, embrace, ambition, and then also the power of God, alignment, surrender, attunement, and then just some powerful forces, dreams, intentions, wish, magic. Because of the discussion, I put weapons, the mind, focus, force, and expression, and ambition and belief. So those were just some of them and some of the sort of categories I was playing with.
Nice work. Yeah.
Okay, Christian, would you unmute?
That's a wonderful subject. So I was thinking about internal power, like the power to manifest, to enable, to encourage, to teach, to inspire. And then I suppose the dominant version of power, which is the external version of power, brutality, bullying, domination. And how, in a way, the second feels several times so ugly that one doesn't recognize the first one.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Okay, Elric.
I wrote down talking or speech, silence, yielding, center, the intellect, logos, the body. That's it.
Nice.
Rachel.
I realized all of my associated words are verbs. They're actions. In my mind, power is associated with action, even in the form of inaction, like rest is an action.
Nice.
Okay.
Did your puppy dog help you?
I don't know how to get onto chat. I screwed myself up here. But could I give my list?
Sure, Sharon, go ahead.
I'm Sharon. So I thought of a bunch of different stuff. I had related to power, patience, stamina, endurance, kindness, the intellect, respect, upbringing, pain, bullying, sneaky, abuse, training, visceral, family heritage, art.
Jung would like that one.
Mm.
Art as power. Yes.
Yes.
So the other Maggie.
Is that me?
Yes, yes, it is.
Cool. I found some interesting ones like validity, like power of an argument.
Okay, we're having a lot of feedback. I don't know what you're doing.
It's not going to get better. I'll just
Okay.
It's my computer. Validity, the power of an argument. vibration, energy, agency, ability, mastery, electricity. Like we say, is the power going to go out tonight? So our electricity is called the power grid, right? Weather, fire, blasting. And then I had a sense of power is what gets something from here to there. Like it's the thing that pushes, it moves things.
Okay, Susan.
I had safety, satisfaction, will, resilience, making things happen, self-control, insight, wisdom, hidden wisdom, truth, soul, self-expression, charisma, empowering others to bring forth essence, creativity, connectivity, and magic.
Thank you. And Chuck.
Hi. What I have is birth, command, death, focus, resilience, physical, energy, sway, determination, capacity, sensitivity, control, force, drive, and mastery.
Is there anyone else? I don't
Yes,
see.
I wanted to say, I have a list of negative ones, and they're all participles. Hating, killing, suing, jailing, muzzling, poisoning, bankrupting, slandering, and destroying. And I would like to know, what is the power over all of these? When there's too many people who back down.
Well, it's interesting that you ask that, because actually the next thing I'm going to be talking about is standing up. So shall we go on, Erica, or?
It's up to you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, if that's okay. We'll have another chance to I'm sorry?
We do have one more hand if you want.
Oh, we did? Oh, please, yes. I thought we were finished.
We were, but Dory?
Yeah, sorry. The first thing that I put down was knowledge. Sorry, my voice is gone. Knowledge, and then strength, emotional and physical, creativity, ability, emotional and physical, motivation, control, self or others, need, which leads to greed and leads to obsession, fear of a powerful person, and fear of not having it or fear of having it. And then the power to do good or to do evil. That's what I have.
All right. Thank you.
Elizabeth, do you want to go on?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Just to manage the time well. Thank you. Thank you so much, Erica. One of the synonyms for power that I particularly like is the word potency. When we talk about being potent and having potential. And that might have something to do with the fact that I love to work, I love to teach. That's one of my great joys in life. But also when I'm working with my writing clients, a lot of what I'm doing is hearing the potential in their book manuscripts and guiding them towards realizing their potential as authors. So I think of potency as an inner mental, psychological, spiritual, or physical capacity. And most of the time I have seen what I call a truly potent person, woman or a man. What I see in them is that they have, that they're deeply embodied, that they're grounded, that they have a kind of a serene strength. And it's a kind of strength in which one can stand up for yourself and you can stand up for others. So you can stand up for justice or stand up against injustice, for instance. So that's what I think of when I think of this word potency. The other thing that occurred to me about potency as power is that our potencies change as we age. You know, in our youth, we typically have more physical capacity, more energy, more flexibility. We can run faster, we can jump higher. You know, all of those things are wonderful when we're young. And as we age, those begin to diminish. Even as we fight against that diminishment, they still tend to diminish. But what comes with age, I think, is a different kind of potency, a different kind of power. And some of you mentioned this. So it's the power to attend, to focus, to reflect, to digest our experience, to be with something for a period of time. So resilience, I think, is something that comes with age generally. Patience is something that comes with age generally. And these are wonderful, underestimated forms of power. Potency, I think, depends on a highly integrated sense of self in the world, which is created in part by establishing meaningful boundaries. So it's our ability, again, to stand up for ourselves. A potent person, a person with embodied power, can stand up for herself or himself and say, this is okay, that's not okay. This is what I want, that is what I don't want. And I think to bring it into a Jungian frame, this is what sustains my soul or nourishes my soul. That is what corrupts my soul. So again, I'm going back to this image of Psyche's knife, the idea that we prioritize, we choose, we decide with a sense of warmth and attachment, a sense that we are crucially interrelated to all of the humans around us, but also our environment, the animals, the plants, everything. In the broadest sense, we share an intercorporeal field with other beings on the planet and with the planet itself. So when I look at female potency, one of the things I was interested in finding out was what are the strategies that we've used to diminish female power or female potency in history. And what I identified was basically two strategies that women and men have colluded in to diminish females and femininity. And both of these strategies are reductive, primarily because they limit our idea of wholeness. They basically say, no, you're a woman, you can't do that. Or no, you're a man, you can't do that. So the first strategy to diminish female potency is what I call passive femininity. Passive females need not take an active part in creating their own lives. They don't need to contribute to the world beyond the domestic sphere. They don't need to make potent commitments, and they don't need to use their authority or leadership capacity. And in fact, those things are frequently denied them. Women aren't natural leaders. And you see this in leadership theory from about 30 or 40 years ago. It's a little frightening. So passive females are compliant. We're servile, and ultimately we're invisible. We're invisible to ourselves, we're invisible to others. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy is peaceful femininity, and this one is trickier. This one is much trickier. Peaceful females are denied the full range of emotions since their persona demands continuous serenity, niceness, and calm, no matter the situation. So what falls into shadow when we look at, or when we try to live as peaceful individuals? Desire, boldness, courage, frustration, anger, aggression, rage. So until we are willing to accept that the full spectrum of emotional feelings, emotional life is available to women as well as men, the kinds of things that fall into shadow, as we know from Jungian theory, they're going to come back and bite us. They're just going to grab us. So it's much better to say, yes, I have the potential to be very, very angry, rather than let that fall into the shadow and let my anger come out in some kind of undifferentiated, raw, destructive fashion. So what I realized in the process of writing Psyche's Knife, and this is a quote from the book, when we accept the assumption that passivity and peacefulness are natural, women are fitted into a small space that reflects none of the original complexity and wholeness of the goddess, none of their power, and none of the responsibility that arises from that power. Power and love are very tricky bedfellows, but they belong together, as we will see in the story of Ares and Aphrodite, who some of you know about. So I'm going to go ahead and start a PowerPoint presentation that I've created for tonight. And let's get going. All right. So Women in Power, 3 views. Our date, let me see if I can move this. All right, let's move this along. So I begin with a wonderful quote from Edward Whitmont. He says, the absence of fighting experience makes for a wishy-washy personality devoid of thrust, motivation, and self-confidence. Differentiation from others and hence self-definition occurs through struggle. Though we may find it unpalatable, violence, far from being merely a response to frustration, is one of mankind's most profoundly moving experiences. It is fascinating as well as terrifying, and closely akin to sexuality and creativity. This is an idea that is going to be deeply uncomfortable for some of us, but it doesn't make it any less true. One of Hillman's, actually the only book that James Hillman wrote about war is called A Terrible Love of War. And he describes the way in which war is both terrible and beautiful. Kind of a terrible beauty, which is a phrase, actually I think it was Yeats used to describe Ireland, a terrible beauty. I think we could apply that to warfare too. So we need our fighting spirit, if you will, to become who we are. I bring in these 2 images. I happen to be very close to cats of all kinds and all sizes. And I bring in these images to show you 2 faces of 2 lions, a lioness and a lion. And I bring in animal imagery to begin to sort of explode the idea that this level of aggression and ferocity belongs to males only. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to spend any time with lion, especially in the wild, but the lionesses, as you all know, or many of you probably know, are the primary hunters in the pride. And the male lions primarily guard the territory. So watching a pride of lionesses hunt and teaching their cubs how to hunt is truly an astonishing thing, a beautiful thing, really, and an expression of violence without any question about it at all. So these 2 images, by bringing us into the animal realm, maybe we can begin to loosen up our idea that females are naturally peaceful and naturally passive. Let's not go with that idea. What I want to do tonight is what I call developing an archetypal eye. And what I mean by that is that human being, thinking, feeling, and behavior shapes itself into recognizable propensities or patterns called archetypes. The archetypal pattern is uniquely filled in by a specific person in a specific situation. This is the archetypal image. So Jung doesn't distinguish between archetype and archetypal image very well at all. His collected works are kind of all over the map on that topic. But Hillman is very clear on this, and this is an important distinction. Archetypes themselves, the pattern, the propensity, are stable over time. Archetypal images evolve. So we can look at the evolution of an archetypal image, and we should look at the evolution of an archetypal image. Where does this come down to ourselves in the world today? No two CEOs, athletes, protesters, or first responders are martial or embody a martial archetype in the same way. They all express martial capacity, for instance, quite differently. So a little bit more on this, the interplay of the archetype, the pattern, and how we embody it, the archetypal image expresses our individuality. We are homo faber more than we are homo sapien. Homo faber, man the maker. We are creators. We are storytellers. The archetypal patterns in our lives are dramas we play out or roles that we adopt. And one way to thoughtfully analyze culture is to notice when an archetype, the pattern or propensity, is especially active or has taken center stage. And I'm going to talk about a few of those in a little while. The first one is the what I call the rise of the fierce young woman warrior, which is something that we have seen since 2005. There were some hints of it a little bit earlier, but it really got rolling in 2005. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, moving along. I love this quote from James Hillman. It's from his book, In Search, Psychology and Religion. He says, attention is the cardinal psychological virtue. We cannot be psychological unless we pay attention. And of course, another cat. I have a fondness for cats. So I want to begin by talking about our contemporary fascination with armed women or martial women. Where do we see evidence of this? How has it showed up in culture? So this is the archetypal cultural view that I spoke about at the beginning. Antonia Fraser has written a marvelous book about women warriors, and she says, there is something deep in the human spirit which finds in the image of a strong and armed woman a figure of awe. And she goes on to say, such images are an inspiration to women, as well as a source of threat and excitement to men. I agree with her. What I've discovered as I've taught this subject is that armed women are a source of threat and excitement to some women as well. And for some, more threat than excitement. Maybe if we have time towards the end, I'll tell a short story about presenting this topic a few years ago in Santa Fe, if I have time. David E. Jones, who has written all about women in warfare and history of war, says females have been misled into believing that the warrior's power historically and biologically belongs only to men. And then he goes on to say, men and women will never reach a common consciousness of their equality as humans until both accept that women have a claim on the title warrior. Again, this statement may be very threatening to some of us. And there are good reasons for it. As Jones says, this has been one of the cultural stories that we have heard and in some cases not questioned. Women aren't warriors. Nothing could be further from the truth. So when I started looking at the 21st century fascination with fierce martial women, I discovered two primary sources for it. The first source are images that saturate popular culture. These images derive from best-selling fiction that generates billions of dollars in revenue. And these images are nearly impossible to avoid. Let me just mention a few of these franchises so that some of you may know them. So a clear example is the Hunger Games trilogy, a series of 3 novels written by Suzanne Collins, turned into 4 films, not 3 films. I don't know why they did that, but I think that the landscape of the story was just so large that they couldn't really fit it all into 3 films, excuse me. The interesting thing about these kinds of images is that it may have completely passed you by. You may not have noticed it, but your 14-year-old granddaughter or 15-year-old daughter or 7-year-old great-granddaughter may have been fascinated with Katniss Everdeen and the whole world of the Hunger Games. When I say that these are a commercial success, what I'm talking about is hundreds of billions of dollars in commercial revenue, the novels and the films. So that's just one of them. There are others. The other source of images of fierce martial women are images and stories of American servicemen and women deployed around the world. And these, sadly, are the images, the stories that many citizens go out of our way to ignore. And their stories really impressed me. I was fascinated with the drive to join the service and the drive to, in particular, to move into an active combat role, which goes against so many cultural scripts for young women. So paying attention to all culture, all forms of human activity is at the heart of archetypal psychology's move beyond the 4 walls of the therapy room. So here I've got in the center, I've got obviously a woman, a service woman, American military. This is in the Middle East. This is an image from a few years ago. And then bookending that image, that central image, are 2 cinematic images. Some of you may recognize on the left, we've got Rey, the heroine from the new Star Wars films, which was a huge departure for the Star Wars franchise. The hero of the first 6 films was Luke Skywalker, a young man, and then he grew up basically on screen. And then when the filmmakers introduced the third trilogy, they flipped it. The central character is Rey, this woman on the left, and she is ferocious. The woman on the right, some of you may recognize from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, these were earlier in the 21st century, the films anyway. The Tolkien novels were mid-20th century. But these films were released in 2001, 2002, and 2003. And this is an image of one of the major characters in that series. So she was a very interesting character. I don't know that I'll have time to talk about her, but if it comes up in the questions and answers, that would be great. Here's another example from popular culture. We have 2 films about Elizabeth of England, and they're separated by about a decade. And just take a moment to study these images. The early Elizabeth on the left, later Elizabeth, same actress, Cate Blanchett, on the right. Very different presentation of these two, of the same woman in a fictional depiction of her life. I don't think, this is what I mean by the evolution of an image. I don't think this is accidental. I think that we can read into these images something about what is happening in culture. Here's another image of a fierce young woman. Most of you will recognize Daenerys Targaryen from the HBO series Game of Thrones. And here's another image of a fierce young woman. So we see images of warrior women all over the place in popular culture as well as in cinema, in fiction. So what are the qualities of these young women? They're vital, they're passionate, committed to a cause. Each one of them discovers and develops a distinctive form of power, often symbolized by their weapon of choice, but not always. They're eager to use their power on behalf of someone or something they love. And over time, they develop a strong affiliation with their pack. This is a very distinctive quality of the fierce young woman. There's a sense in which she is not interested in rising to the top of a hierarchy and dominating others. She's interested in working with others on behalf of an important, passionate cause. Their prowess includes clear strategic thinking, physical strength, toughness, and skill. So toughness is also a kind of power. Rigorous training instills more than physical strength, agility, or coordination. The training is actually a significant mental and psychological feat involving focus, persistence, tolerance for pain, as well as acceptance of failure on the way to success. The physical and mental training helps them develop an embodied sense of their own power, which is first and foremost an internal resource. This is what I meant by potency. It's an internal embodied sense of who I am, what I want, what I'm committed to, how I'm going to act in the world, even to the very tough question of what would I die for? In the end, each of these young women emerges as a bold person, not some animus-possessed distortion of true femininity. They've embodied their Mars, if you will, their Ares, their Athena. This is a quote from Tanya Hudnall. She says, "We want to show them that, hey, we can fill these boots. We don't want to be men, but we are tough, mentally and physically." Now, the other thing I want to say about these fierce young women is that they have cross-generational appeal. So what we do from an archetypal perspective is we don't treat girlhood or young womanhood as a stage of life that one enters and exits. What we do with the archetypal eye is we view it as a pattern of experience that occurs biologically once during youth, but it re-arises over the course of a woman's life. So within a mature woman, the pattern of experience, one's girl, can be reactivated and remembered. And it's a lot of fun. One's girl can deeply identify with and become wholly involved by contemporary accounts of martial women. So you don't have to be 14 to, admire a Katniss Everdeen or a Sergeant Major Hudnall. You can be 65, 75 and get excited by this kind of passion. Rosalind Miles and Robin Cross, who also wrote a wonderful book about warrior women, say, where information about women at war exists, it is often sparse, and many warlike women blaze all too briefly into view. Some of you might recognize this statue at the corner of Hyde Park in London. It's a statue of the Iceni queen, Boudica, who fought and nearly defeated the Romans who had colonized England or that part of the world in the 2nd century AD. Rosalind Miles and Robin Cross go on to say the reality of women at war challenges a profoundly held fantasy in both women and men, that men make war to protect and defend women, that women are too weak to fight and unsuited to warfare, and that all women have to do in wartime is to keep the home fires burning. Historically, the reality is very different. Women have served as combatants in the US Armed Forces since the Revolutionary War, when they avoided being detected as females by disguising their appearance and changing their names. Likewise, hundreds of women presented themselves as men to fight in the Civil War. More than 12,000 women enlisted in the US Navy and Marine Corps during World War I, and some 400 died. Approximately 350,000 women served in the US Armed Forces in World War II, assigned to every theater of combat. It's an extremely important point. No martial domain is exclusive either to males or females. Both attacked enemy strongholds, defended castles, laid sieges, and led expeditionary forces. Both built military empires, dueled for honor with sword and pistol, and designed military strategy. Spying, terrorism, banditry and piracy, assassination, demolitions, aerial combat, guerrilla warfare, hand-to-hand combat, all boast expert women practitioners. So the question that I pose is, what have we forgotten? What have we forgotten? If we go back and look at the original stories and the original images of female divinities, goddesses from a variety of different traditions, what do we see? What do we see? So one of the first images that I want to offer is the Hindu goddess Durga. She is considered the visible incarnation of rage. She's a golden-skinned, 10-armed woman. She holds a spear and wears a blood-red sari. Durga was born during the primordial war between gods and demons, which dragged on until the gods concentrated their energies. Flames sprang from their mouths in the shape of a beautiful woman. And although Durga was produced by the gods, she was stronger than all of them, and she was eager to fight. The gods handed weapons to Durga, who rode a lion towards the enemy chief, Mahisa. He used his powers to assume one fearsome form after another, but still Durga advanced until, as Mahisa assumed the form of a buffalo, the goddess slaughtered him, freeing the earth for the gods to inhabit. Now, most of the original goddess figures are complex. They are multifaceted, and Durga is no exception. Although her maternal nature is rarely emphasized in myth, she was, in addition to being a warrior, she was the mother of Lakshmi and Sarasvati by her consort Shiva. The Egyptian, mistress of the bow and ruler of the arrow Neath. She is one of my favorite discoveries. I have found the Egyptian tradition to be far richer than I originally realized. She's considered a warrior goddess by some scholars. Other scholars debate that, but it's undeniable that she's associated with weaponry. either in the context of hunting or warfare or both from the earliest times. So her iconography consisted of crossed arrows and bows, which of course gave her this name, the mistress of the bow and ruler of arrows. Early Egyptian theophoric names for Neath were Neath fights and Neath is victorious, which also underscore the bellicose aspect of this goddess's character. Whether she was known as a successful huntress or for her prowess in battle, her support in winning victories for the tribe and later the nation would have made her a very important and powerful goddess. She's also one of the oldest goddesses in the Egyptian tradition. She is credited with actually creating the cosmos. She was a creator goddess. She was a mother goddess. She was a mother of humans as well as gods. And her presence continued for thousands of years. So she's one of the most long-lived goddesses in the Egyptian tradition. Again, if there are questions, I have a little more I can say about Neath. So now I want to go to the Greek goddess Gaia. She appears in Hesiod's Theogony, which is a narration of the creation of the cosmos. And there were three original realms: Chasm, Gaia, which is Earth, and Tartarus, along with Eros. So Earth, Gaia, bore first of all one equal to herself, starry heaven, Uranos. And all those that were born of heaven and earth were the most fearsome of children, and their own father loathed them from the beginning. So Uranos would cover Gaia every night, and she gave birth to their children, who their father Uranus loathed. And because he loathed them, as soon as each of the children was born, he would hide them away in a cavern of the earth. In other words, he would stuff the child, the just born child, back into the body of Gaia, and he wouldn't let them into the light. Hesiod tells us that Uranos took pleasure in his wicked work, and while the huge earth was tight pressed inside and groaned in pain. So what does Gaia do? She vows revenge. Out of her own body, she created gray adamant, a metal of fearsome hardness, and fashioned it into a sickle. Let me back up just a second. She vowed revenge. She asked one of her children to assist her. Who would assist her in creating necessary separation between herself and Uranos? And one of them responded, Kronos. All right. So what we see with the sickle is that the moon crescent, according to Whitmont, and the sickle-shaped sword occur repeatedly in mythological imagery. Gaia's sickle. They refer to the rising power of the feminine, the fact that the force of the moon, the force of psychic tides of life, of emotion rather than rational functioning, represents an energy not to be disregarded. Continuing in the Greek tradition, I want to just briefly touch on Artemis and Hecate. Jeanette Perry, in her book Pagan Meditations, mentions that the queen of the wild beasts, that would be Artemis, and the dark sorceress, that would be Hecate, share an affinity for bloody sacrifice. The accusation of cruelty does not disturb them. It is therefore necessary to correct a too tender interpretation of predominantly matriarchal religions by remembering that the full range of feminine powers includes their terrible, mortal, and bloody aspects. All right. So in case you think that Artemis, for instance, is just an old myth, let's take a look at the evolution of this image. Artemis from a 5th century vase, 5th century BCE vase, and Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games about 10 years ago. This is what I mean by paying attention to the evolution of an image. All right, I'm going to pause there and give us a chance for any questions that may have arisen in the first part of this presentation.
So if you want to raise your hand in reactions, I will call on you. Anyone have a thought or a question? Jeanette.
Is there any way to avoid the violence of this?
To avoid the violence of the martial archetype?
Of the archetypes, yes.
Horrible. Yes, in just a few minutes, I'm going to be talking about archetypal Mars, and in terms of astrological, the astrological view. But what we learned from Jung is that the best way to avoid, I don't think that you can avoid violence with either Ares or Mars, because they are archetypes that manifest themselves in violence or in violent acts. But what Jung would say is that it's better to have a good sense of your own archetypal Ares or archetypal Mars, or even your archetypal Athena, if we're going to use the Greek pantheon. Better to own that, if you will, to acknowledge that is an aspect of your personality, so that it does not come out in a raw, undifferentiated form. So let me give you just a simple example of that. If we understand that our archetypal Mars or our archetypal Ares is our drive, it's the part of us that will march into a battle without much thought to our own safety or health, because we're that passionately engaged with whatever that battle is. If we think about that symbolically, one of the things that we can ask ourselves is, when do I want to rush into a fight? When do I feel the impulse to fight on behalf of someone, on behalf of an idea or a cause? When do I want to just join the fray? That is Mars or Ares, if you will. That's that impulse to join. And if we can recognize that in ourselves and see that impulse and understand that we could quickly be overtaken by archetypal Mars or archetypal Ares and become kind of inflated with a sort of a battle frenzy, if you will, that's the moment when the violence will no longer be within our control, or when drive can convert itself into violence. But if we become familiar, if we befriend this aspect of our character, then we'll recognize those moments when we feel that martial or that Ares, the power of Ares, or even Athena, will feel that, and we'll recognize it for what it is, and we'll be able to pause and choose. That's really, fundamentally the difference between being possessed by an archetype and being knowledgeable about an archetype. Big difference.
Can I say something, Elizabeth?
Sure, yeah.
Going back to the lioness,
Mhm.
I think is the perfect image of nature has violence and birth and love, and it's all there. And if we don't come to terms with our own, it goes into the shadow and we act it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. The other thing about the lionesses and lions too is they sleep about 22 hours a day. They only hunt about 2 hours a day. So the hunt is exhausting for them, but the predation is only a part of their life, which I think is the point that you're making.
Yeah.
I mean, they spend a lot more of their time playing with their cubs than they do hunting.
So, Dorothy, I heard you want to speak. Unmute, Dorothy. No.
There we go. Thank you. This is the first of these lectures that I've participated in, and I find it very interesting because I finished working with the military for 23 years through the Bronfenbrenner Center at Cornell University. But even more importantly, for my own, I don't know if you want to call it integration, growth, or whatever, I had considerable contact in doing advocacy work for the Native people here in New York State, the Haudenosaunee people, mainly the Mohawk people. And I can assure you that if there is ever a question of integrating the aggression with the nurturance and all that other good stuff, go visit them because they really do have it together. It was quite a joy, and they have no problem at all in introducing a woman as this is my friend, she's a woman warrior. I mean, the language has been used there since the 1970s. They were part of a land takeover at what is now called Ganyonge. When there was a conflict in Oka in Ontario, that Ontario or Quebec, I'm not positive which, but women were behind the barricades. Not only that, they took their female children with them, because it's just part of their learning.
Mhm.
So, do pay a visit to them if you ever get a chance. They're quite delightful.
Wonderful invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carrie.
Hi, it's Kari. Elizabeth, I just want to thank you so much. This has just been such a rich exploration. And there's a piece I would love if you have anything more you can offer to it. That a little earlier talking about potency and potential, and how in repressing the potency, there are two strategies of becoming passive and peacefulness. And there's a way in which that feels like, the bright side or the light that most of us are trying towards.
Yes.
And I also see within it, there's a violence to self that happens there. Like there's a repression. And I'm thinking of my own upbringing, that those are the roles that I was offered and taught and given credit for being. And there was a repression in that. Can you speak a little bit more about it's like there's a way that we swing from that side to swinging to the violence. And I feel like there's something in that transition, and maybe you're going to go there, but I feel like the offering is not necessarily one or the other. It's that there's a place, if this is not being oppressed, what is under this that then has full expression, of which the violence might just be one expression.
I think if I understand your question correctly, this is where thinking about kinds of power has been so helpful to me, because it is easy to see that. I mean, I think probably everybody in this room would love a more peaceful world. We would love to be more at peace ourselves and in our families and in our communities. There's no question that peace is a value, but insisting that I myself am consistently peaceful, consistently serene, consistently calm is a form of repression. It tamps down the full emotional expression that all of us have available to us as human beings. And of course, the full emotional expression that we share with our animal cousins, without question. So one of the things that I have found a tremendous kind of power that helps me not go towards either extreme is the power of restraint. Restraint as a kind of power is consistently underestimated. It takes tremendous power to be restrained. And so an example of that would be, okay, I feel, rage coming over me about some injustice. And I either can choose to, act out and just, go there, or I can pause. I can have a moment where I'm restraining myself to reflect on that urge, that impulse. So restraint allows me to bring my value system into my emotionality, so that I'm acting not just from my power center, so to speak, my power chakra, but I'm responding in a fully integrated way with my heart, my mind, spirit. Everything is coming together. I don't know. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, and that gives me a place to explore. It's sort of that place where what's the difference between repression and restraint? And I get that there's something energetically, but it might not look the same. It might look the same on the surface, but there's something really different internally. Thank you.
Yeah. Restraint is knowing the impulses. Repression, rather than shutting them down. It's like that wonderful image of a charioteer where she is riding in a chariot. Well, Queen Boudica, the image that I showed just a little while ago, she's got her reins, reins in her hands, controlling a couple of very wild horses. That's an image of restraint. That's a tremendous amount of martial power under her control. She's directing it where she wants it to go, rather than having it just explode.
Okay, Alistair or Judy? I don't know which one. Alistair, do you want to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Erica. I do. Just to add a little bit onto this piece about restraint, I wanted to share something that came from Jordan Peterson that I heard this week. He was commenting on the Sermon on the Mount and blessed are the meek. And he said a better, or an alternate, we'll say, interpretation of the meek would be, blessed are those who bear arms and are skilled and have the capacity to use them and leave them sheathed. So I find that a much more powerful version of blessed are the meek. And I think it's in line with what you're getting at here, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. A very skilled warrior knows when to draw the sword from the sheath and doesn't do it often.
Okay. Penny.
About 30 years ago, I was I was seeing a number, I mean, I'm an analyst, and I was seeing a number of women who took the Boston Rape Crisis Center Marshall training. And I thought, okay, I really need to do this. You know, I followed their example. So I did the Boston Rape Crisis Center training. It was so powerful because they taught us, you know, physical moves and whatnot. But we would have to deal with an attacker who was dressed kind of in all this gear, all this, they were protected. And it was an extraordinary experience of being in one's own physical power and terror. Most of the women in the group had had terrible, violent experiences. They'd been raped, kidnapped, etc. And one of the things I realized is that as women, we are taught to nurture. And so here you are confronting somebody trying to kill you, and there's an impulse to take care of the killer or the rapist. It's very, very deep. And I was getting ready for the graduation day, and I thought, oh, wow, I'm really going to have a great dream. And the dream was about confronting a very passive place in myself. So that was like, oh, wow.
Wow.
But so we're going across the Boston Common at night to my graduation ceremony, and my two little boys at that time said, Mom, you walk in front because you know how to do this now. And it was just beautiful for my sons to come and witness when I had to confront the attacker and really be in my physical power. It's one thing to think about it. It's another thing to be in that physical space of needing to save your life. And not necessarily to want to kill someone, but to save your own life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Thank you for that story and the dream. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Sylvia. Oh, Karen.
Yeah, I love, oh,
Sylvia.
thank you. I love that Penelope brought up her experience with the rape crisis training. In my 20s, for 6 years, I trained in the martial arts with a women's karate school. And it was probably one of the most profound developmental experiences of my life. But the beauty of it, and I wish this was a model for all armed humans. The beauty of it was the deep spiritual foundation. I mean, we used nunchucks, we used weapons, we trained in weapons, we trained fiercely, but there was a deep spiritual underpinning grounded in Zen, Buddhism. So I love that. And then there is also, I suppose it would be considered an archetype of the Bodhisattva, which is another archetype of a spiritual warrior. So just wanted to add that in. Thanks, Penelope, for bringing that up.
Great.
And
Right.
Carol. You have to unmute, Carol. Unmute.
Well, there's so many themes to follow here that are beautiful. But while we have the time, I wanted to ask if you were going to talk about people's fear of powerful women, particularly women with weapons or women who are angry. I don't know if this is the moment, but that was my question. And I just want to mention one thing in terms of Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman who actually ran for president. And she was in Washington, but she told me that, well, first of all, she said, oh, everything we've worked for is being destroyed. But she said her power, the power of being an effective female Black woman in the midst of what was going on, was to be in the midst of people who wanted to kill you or had killed people of your color, and to remember that you were there to work with them.
Mm.
And I thought she was a powerful woman. But again, to my question about fear of angry women, if this is the time, I'd like to ask that.
Well, I've touched on it already. I'm not planning on going into it much more, but what historians have discovered as they study women warriors throughout history and our response to armed women or strong women is that they are very exciting to women, but they're frightening to men. But they're also exciting. That was the finding of Antonia Fraser's study. And that makes some sense to me.
So exciting to women, meaning sexually exciting? Or more exciting in multiple ways?
It could be sexually exciting. I think it meant excitement as in the sense of awe, of kind of admiration. Allure, maybe a better way to describe it, respect, but also frightening as well, that kind of raw power.
I see.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say about that tonight.
Okay.
But I do recommend Antonia Fraser's book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Should we go on, Elizabeth, maybe?
I think so, Erica. Yeah, let's do that. So I'm going to continue with the slide presentation. Where am I? There I am. Okay, so we left off with Katniss Everdeen, a modern day Artemis. Okay, there we go. So now we want to look at three of our Greek and Roman from the classical period, three figures, three archetypes. So now we're going to the origins of this martial power. So we've got archetypal Ares. He's the god of war, strife, and fighting. He's the principle of aggressive energy. It's a kind of combativeness that's enjoyed for its own sake. It's also the willingness to fight on behalf of others or a cause. It can take the form of aggressive self-assertion. So the battlefield need not necessarily be a place where there's swords or guns or anything like that. It can be the battlefield of politics, aggressive self-assertion. I'm thinking back to some of the presidential debates in 2016. As an example of archetypal Ares. Ares was also known as the father of victory and the helper of justice. So again, I encourage you to think of battlefields in a metaphorical sense. What are you willing to fight for? Where are you willing to enter the fray? And a little bit heedless of your own safety. So that impulse to fight on behalf of something, that is archetypal Ares. He embodies vitality, brute strength, and courage, yet also bloodlust, the blind battle frenzy that overtakes warriors on the field. He appears very rarely in classical literature. Ares is the chosen lover of Aphrodite in the Odyssey. It's a wonderful story in the Odyssey. And according to the Iliad in Book 5, he is the most hated of all the gods. We don't have very many classical sources for Ares, but the few that we do have are quite evocative. I wanted to mention one other personal story. I didn't know this was archetypal Ares at the time or Ares possession, but I got a sense of my own archetypal Ares or Ares possession when I was about 15 years old. And our high school arranged a flag football game with women only. And so we were out there on the regular football field that the boys used and playing flag football. And even though it was a game, I felt myself almost predatory in my frenzy. I just felt this energy come over me, this energy to win at all costs. 30 years later, I went, oh, that was Aries possession. I really felt that frisson, that frenzy. One of our most wonderful sources for information about Aries is the Homeric hymn to Aries. They're called the Homeric hymns. We don't really know if the author was Homer. We don't even know if Homer was Homer. But in that story, what's very interesting is that he's described in all of these ways that I've already described. He's a god of battle and warfare and willing to fight and bold. And yet the last third of the hymn is a petition to Ares to bring peace. Bring me peace, Ares. Restrain my battle frenzy. Restrain my impulse to violence. So if you have a chance to read the Homeric hymn to Ares, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful poem. If we have time later tonight, I have my copy and I can read it during the question and answer session, if there's time. Archetypal Athena. So many people think that Athena is not really a fighter, but she is. If we look at her iconography, she carries a spear instead of a sword, but her shield, and as in this statue right here, her shield is a fully formed, fully ironclad shield, ready for battle. She's known primarily as the goddess of wisdom, peace, and reason. She's the goddess of handicrafts and a protector of Athens. She's the patron deity of Athens, obviously. But she's also the goddess of warfare and strategy, and she is fully armed. So compared to Ares, the distinction between Ares and Athena is whereas Ares is impulsivity, rage, battle frenzy, Athena is more cool and calculating. She is more a divinity of battle strategy, war games, things like that. She is the mentor to Odysseus and helps the Greeks, the Achaeans, prevail against the Trojans in the Trojan War. Odysseus is many times referred to in the Iliad and the Odyssey, primarily in the Iliad actually, as very wily, as very clever. He's and in this sense, it makes sense that Athena would be his patron deity, if you will. She's also a goddess of heroic endeavor. So because she's female, I notice that there's a tendency in depictions of her, in descriptions of her, not the images, but in the narratives, to emphasize her strategic coolness, her calculating mind, that she's a goddess of wisdom and peace. She loathes Ares, by the way. Those two do not get along at all. But I wonder if some of this presentation of Athena, the emphasis on reason and calculation and strategy and wisdom, is because she's female. I think we need to look at our discomfort with armed females, even in Greek classical literature from 2,500 years ago, because that was a terribly patriarchal culture, as we know. This is an image of Athena being birthed from Zeus's head. She springs forth from Zeus's head fully armed. And this is kind of a wonderful image because her body posture here is very active. She's ready to go. She is fully armed. She's prepared. Archetypal Athena, according to Anne Baring and Jules Cashford in their book on the evolution of the goddess, she says Athena embodies the quality of restraint, and her flashing eyes are the emblem of a lucid intelligence that can see beyond immediate satisfaction. So in this sense, she's different from Ares. She provides good counsel, thinking through, or practical foresight, the capacity to reflect. That's what she offers to her proteges. This is called Metis, after her mother of the same name, translated as counsel or practical wisdom. Athena, two slides, sorry. She provides leadership which counsels, tempers, and molds outcomes. When there is tension, she supplies the clarifying insight needed for decision making. She causes reflection in the moment, reflection that leads to prudent action. She intervenes, she stays the hand upon the sword, she restrains the eagerness to engage, and keeps at a distance until counsel can be taken, the plan of the gods revealed. So one way to understand Ares and Athena from this perspective is that Athena is a kind of medicine for Ares' impulsiveness, whereas Ares will rush into battle without thought. You could consider calling upon Athena to pause, reflect, recognize the impulse to battle, but ask yourself, is this the time? Is this the place? Is this my fight? So these are the kinds of questions that can accompany the power of restraint, that can give us a moment of reflection so that we can be wise in the way that Athena is wise. Now, in case we think that Athena and Ares are very, very different from one another, I want you to take a look at this image again from a crater, an illuminated, a painted vessel, circa 540 BCE. We see Zeus in the center, Athena on the left, and Ares on the right. Now, again, just pay attention to the iconography, to their weapons. They're both holding large shields. Athena's shield is actually a little bit bigger than the shield of Ares in this image. They're both using spears as opposed to swords. In the sculpture that we saw previously, we saw Ares with a sword, a very large sword, like a broadsword, a little bit like a Scottish claymore. And it's very clear that both from their postures, that both of them are eager to fight. In fact, in this particular image, Athena is leaning in even more than Ares is. So again, I think it's important to separate the narrative from the imagery and really study the imagery and ask, okay, is this really the picture of restraint? Is this Athena the restrained? I don't think so, not here. So that suggests that she is fully capable of fighting when she wants to fight, when it's the right time. So now I want to shift to archetypal Mars. So as you all probably know, I mean, this is well known. The Romans did a very peculiar thing when they settled in what is modern day Italy. They essentially imported their pantheon of divinities from a combination of sources, most of them from Greece, but also Etruscan sources, and there's one other stream that feeds their pantheon of gods, and I'm forgetting what that is right now. I can find out for us. So what we see is that they took over the Greek gods and they renamed them. So Ares becomes Mars, but there are differences. There are many more similarities than differences, but there are differences. So Mars is the Roman god of power, which could be directed towards end other than warfare. There was a season of warfare in ancient Rome, and then a season that began and ended. And then there was a season of planting, of growing crops, providing enough food for the community. And so there is this idea that that the power of Mars could be redirected towards agriculture. It wasn't a god of agriculture, but that same kind of drive could be redirected towards basically a world of peace, a world at peace. But archetypal Mars also represents, just like Ares, the will to fight and to win in any field of battle. He also symbolizes the experience of battle frenzy. Interestingly, Mars and Ares are not very complex characters. They're not strategic or clever like Athena or Odysseus. So archetypal Mars, archetypal Ares, they're both invincible when they're facing an honest enemy, but not one that's stealthy or sneaky. They're not Machiavellian, to fast forward 1,500 years. Mars can be insensitive and crude, but he's essentially open and honest. Couple of more thoughts about archetypal Mars from James Hillman. Beyond the violent occasions of martial action, the god is also there, and essentially so, in the will to fight, the love of war, the rush to win, and the rush of winning, and the fanatic's sacrifice. Mars is also the fire that tempers men and women and melds them into a deployable team. The impetuous passion of Mars, again, impetuousness, impulsiveness, makes war happen in the flesh and blood of history. If war were left only to Apollo or Hermes or Athena, war games, war plans, and maneuvers of the mind would be enough. So Mars, like Ares, is the one that mixes it up. They're the ones that actually enter the fray and are happy to do so. Hillman points out some of the epithets for Mars that are frightening, frankly. So he's known as blind, raging, feral or wild, untamable, overpowering, excessive, insane, bloody, accursed, swift, sudden, horrible, vehement, unrestrained, wanton, disordered, savage, harsh, archaic, ancient. These are all epithets for Mars, drawn from Roman sources. So now let me turn to astrological Mars. So as I mentioned before, when, in the hands of a talented psychological astrologer, the Greek, the Roman pantheon becomes a kind of an inner theater that helps us understand ourselves. And the important point is that in an astrological chart, a natal chart, every single one of us, men and women, have a Mars, where the Mars is placed, what house and what sign, how it relates to the other planets and houses, all of that is extremely important too. But the point is that the insight is that we all have an inner Mars. So what is that inner Mars? It's our drive, it's our aggression, it's our fierceness, it's our feistiness, it's our willingness to take a stand. It's self-assertion. It's, if you will, the fighting principle for our life purpose. If we didn't have this fighting principle, we would probably never be able to pursue our life purpose, because pursuing it requires us to push, to be motivated, to be driven. It also, in some cases, and you might remember this especially as children, it requires us to assert ourselves. A huge part of adolescence is staking a claim to our own life and fighting our way out of the family so that we can become ourselves. That's true, seems to be true in the West. I don't know whether it's as true in indigenous cultures or in Eastern cultures, but we certainly see it in Western culture. Astrological Mars is energy applied to a goal. It's your motivating force, but it's also your desire to dominate, to impose your will on another person. So these are all astrological Mars. Without Mars, we are impotent. Rather than repress our martial power, Mars needs our inner loyalty and support so that we can effectively defend our values in the face of opposition and can go after what we want in life. Liz Green and Howard Zesportis are two of the finest psychological astrologers I know of. And Liz Green, as some of you may know, is also a very skilled Jungian, wonderful Jungian scholar. And I believe she's also a Jungian analyst as well. So when you read her works on astrology, you also are going to get a lot of Jung theory in there, which is great. Lauren Silman, a very dear buddy of mine, says, think of Mars as a young warrior, ready for action, with weapons in his hands, ready to go out and conquer something, anything. By knowing your Mars, you understand your intense drive, or lack thereof, your fierce passions, and your level of feistiness. Only armed with knowledge can Mars be put into useful action, which, by the way, delights him. He just wants to do something. Lawrence has written a wonderful book, a good primer of archetypal astrology called Planets in Play, in case you're interested in pursuing this a little bit. All right. And then a final thought for us. I want to turn to Heracles' fifth task and speak about it in terms of martial power. Just a thought to leave you with near the end. So some of you may know that the fifth task of Heracles or Hercules is cleaning the Augean stables. Green and Zesportis say this. In Heracles' fifth task, cleaning the Augean stables, Mars serves as a cleansing agent, sweeping away with surgical precision what is useless and outworn in life. This getting rid of all the old shit is another facet of the martial function and is related to our capacity to make decisions which rid us of an outgrown and smelly past. So martial power serves transformation that requires, as a first step, cleaning out the old. We can see this at an individual level. We can see this at a cultural level. We can see it acting on the world stage in a number of different ways. So that's the final thought, martial power and transformation. Thank you very much. All right. Time for a final round of questions. I think we have a couple of minutes left. Oh, we have about 10 minutes left. Good. Good for us.
Yeah. Any questions? That was a lot. That was very rich. Any thoughts or experiences anybody want to share? Andy, you have a question?
Yeah. So this presentation hits me kind of funny as a practicing Quaker. And I think the martial trait is deeply buried among Quakers, this commitment to peace testimony and showing a face of sweetness, kindness. I wonder if you would speak to that. And there's also a hint about Quaker activism is kind of striking out. Just would appreciate your reaction or reflection on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting example of where an entire culture wouldn't necessarily, I don't know enough about Quakers to say that they reject the martial sensibility, but that what I might wonder about is not that Mars doesn't appear, or Ares doesn't appear, or Athena doesn't appear in Quaker culture, but where does it show up? That's how I would turn the question. How is it expressed? And one of the ways that occurs to me that it might be expressed is the will to establish and maintain a very pure culture, to be Quaker in a world that would probably want you to assimilate, maybe doesn't understand your values, but in other words, the ability to say, no, this is our identity, this is who we are, we're taking a stand for these values. That also might be a way Mars might be funding that drive, if you will. That's a thought.
Thank you.
Kate.
Okay, hi everybody. I just had a couple of questions because as a therapist, I have worked with many female veterans, and I think that their issues that they have when they come back from the war zone are different from their male counterparts, and I suspect that has something to do with being female and being raised as female in our culture, or any culture really. So I'm wondering if you have any clues, given your research and so on, about, well, I have two questions actually, but my first one is about how female veterans historically, or mythologically, how they heal themselves upon return to the culture. Do you have any sensibility about that?
I do, and it's partly based on, a wonderful dissertation that one of my students completed about 1.5 years ago. She herself is a female veteran, and her research was about the difficulty of homecoming for veterans, not just females, but males as well as females.
Right.
And so, not being a veteran myself, I go to her for her wisdom. And one of the things that she pointed out is that what seems to be the most difficult adjustment for a lot of vets is that there was a sense of camaraderie and community, a sense of having a tribe, a sense of belonging when they were in the service. Regardless of what role they played, and that when they come home, there's this sense of no longer having that sisterhood, that brotherhood, that it's the isolation, or that it's being dismembered, from a body that had great meaning for them. That's very difficult. For the female vets that she spoke with and that I've spoken with, one of the problems that they had is the misogyny within military culture.
Right.
Huge amount of misogyny.
Right.
You don't belong here. You're a girl. You can't do it. I don't trust you to be my battle buddy.
Right.
All of that. So, where I think it's incredibly brave for them to join the military and want to serve for any number of reasons. Just the misogyny that they encounter in a place where they want to belong is also very painful.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the society totally doesn't see them.
Exactly.
You're such a sweet little girl. How could you possibly have gone to war? Or, okay, maybe you were over there, but you were on a base, right? You were safe. You didn't go out.
You weren't really in combat. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Really
but I got to
serving.
tell you, in a country, in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, men don't touch women. And so male soldiers can't touch them. So guess who has to do that?
Right. Yeah.
on the house to house. So yeah. They were right in there all the time. But I don't know about, so I guess my question is, I work with male veterans as well, but the issues for women are much more complex.
They're more complicated.
And I didn't know, I'm just wondering, historically, if that's also been an issue, but maybe we may not know that. We may not have that information,
I don't think we have that information because it's only really been in, last 20, not even 20 years that that women have been able to serve in anything like the same kind of capacities as their male counterparts. And it's still women who serve in the military, particularly women who seek the more active, combat roles, they run into so much cultural prejudice.
Yeah.
They're not women, they're unnatural, they're, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they suffer much more psychologically when they come home. And I also think there's this issue. Well, they say, that when a woman comes home to her husband, when a female comes home to a male, he doesn't have the same capacity to be nurturing in the same way that if it's reversed, if a male veteran comes home, his female wife, I'm overgeneralizing, but there's this way that they can get more support when they come home than a female might be able to get. And then of course, the rest of the culture saying, no, you didn't, you're lying. You weren't really there. You didn't really do all those things.
Right.
So yeah.
So there's the wound of invisibility for the female vet.
And there's also the overlay of the female being the life giver. This is, biologically, that's, it's in us. It's in us historically. It's in us, genetically, in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And so to take a life, in that context, I can see how that would be much more of a conflict.
And yet, when we look at the original figures, when we go to myth, all over the world, we see goddesses that are life givers and killers. They're both.
Right.
They're mothers and they're warriors.
Isn't that Mother Earth too? I mean,
yeah.
The creator and the destroyer. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Elena? Elena?
I wanted to make a comment about Rosa Parks, as it is her birthday today. And maybe a question involved in that as well. And that my thought was that she was embodied Athena, channeled that Athena energy as an introverted woman, quiet but wise, chose her moment, or her moment appeared for her. I just wanted to pause and give credit to Rosa Parks.
That's a fabulous, fabulous image. So her battlefield was the bus. She embodied it would be interesting to find out whether she was embodying Ares or Mars in that moment, or Athena. What was it finally enough? And she just stood up impulsively, willfully, stood her ground. Was that an infusion of Mars, or was that Athena? Interesting question.
It was actually after months of planning. That was not an accidental, impulsive moment. That was a strategy she had planned for a long time.
Okay, so there's the strategy. Yes, that is Athena then. Great.
Okay.
Wonderful final image. Thank you.
We have to wrap up. Would you like to say anything else, Elizabeth?
Just to thank you. It's been a delight to be here, and I really appreciate being able to share this information.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And just as a plug, in order to bring people like Elizabeth, these wonderful presenters, we rely on you for donations. So before you leave, could you please go to the chat and click on the donation button, if you would, please. So thank you, Elizabeth, and everyone for coming. And this has been a rich night.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very nicely done. Thank you, Elizabeth.
You're very welcome.
Thank you,
Yes,
Elizabeth.
thank you so much. Such a gift.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great to be with you again.
Good to see you, Ed.
Look forward to the next time. Great job, as always.